From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
We are pleased to welcome today's guest, Carrie Damiano, who grew up in Coeur d'Alene, but we have here her today to talk to us about one of her travels. She has traveled extensively. As a matter of fact, she has visited 55 countries around the world, and she's visited also much of the United States. Our guest went to Grand Canyon College in Arizona. She lived 2 years in England. She, for the past 10 years, has worked in Arizona at the Phoenix Transformers. While working there, she has become very acquainted with a lot of individuals who are from Vietnam. In fact, 85% of the employees, I think, are from there. And so in 1996, she and her mother visited Vietnam, in fact, in July 1996. So today we're advertising the program as a return to Vietnam for a look at what has happened since the troubled days of the 1960s and 1970s. Carrie, it's a pleasure having you on our program. You're kind to come by. I know you're very busy between here and Arizona, and we're so happy that you took time out to be with us.
You're welcome.
And I'm pleased to have our regular panelists. First of all is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and we shall ask Janelle to commence today's questioning with our guest.
I want to do sort of a who, what, where, when kind of thing, and Tony's already indicated that you went, the when was in July of 1996, so that was this past summer. Yes. But can you tell us a bit about where you went? What areas did you visit?
Yes. Well, we went to Vietnam via cruise, and we started in Singapore, went up the coast of Thailand, and then spent 3 days, 3 different stops in the southern part of Vietnam, and then up the coast of China and ended up in Hong Kong. So we actually had 3 stops in Vietnam.
So you had a chance to get some of the flavor of different areas too.
That is correct.
And can you tell us what were some of the differences between the towns, and tell us first of all what the towns were, and then what some of the differences were.
Okay. Well, the first stop was Ho Chi Minh City, and as many cities of the world, it was bustling, it was a lot of people, it was traffic here and there, and so the city flavor was completely different from the other 2 stops that we had that were much more village type of stops. The second one was Nha Trang, and that was a very desert-like stop. We got to see completely different terrain than we saw when we were in the city. And the third stop was Da Nang, and that was very, very tropical. And so we really got 3 different flavors.
All in a country that's not too large in size.
That's
About how
correct.
large is Vietnam, do you know?
I don't know. But we didn't get to stop in the north at all, and so that was a whole other section that we didn't get to see.
And who went on this? Of course, there would be many people who were with whom you were not acquainted, but you did have a very special traveling companion. And
yes, my mother and I traveled together quite a bit. We've been wanting to go to Vietnam for a long time, so this was kind of a trip come true for us.
Steve Schenck.
Carrie, you said you've been wanting to go to Vietnam for a long time. Why?
Yes.
Was it the association with employees in your company, or
Very much so. I am so appreciative of what the Vietnamese people have been through. I know a number of their personal stories, and they really just cut to the heart what these people have come from and made their way to America, and so I really wanted to see where they came from.
Well, I want to get to questions about your trip, but I am curious to know what their reaction was, your employees' reaction when they learned that you were going to Vietnam.
Incredibly proud.
Oh.
Incredibly proud.
Interesting. Yes. Another question that cropped up from one that Janelle asked. All 3 stops were in what used to be South Vietnam.
Yes.
Was there a reason for that? Do you have any idea why there were no stops in the former North Vietnam?
It's really not open to tourism.
I see.
Yeah.
And that is I wonder if you know whether that's a function of the facilities there or just a government policy.
Probably some of both, but certainly the facilities in the South were what we would consider substandard. So in the North, which is more remote and less access to the Western world, would be even less than that.
What was your biggest surprise? Was there anything that just really caught you off guard about Vietnam?
I don't know if I would call it a surprise or not. I think what I was the most pleased about were the people, that they were so excited to have us there. There was no anti-American sentiment. They were just open-armed and friendly and anxious to talk to us, and that was just a real pleasant surprise.
Before the show, we talked a little bit about the fact that you tried to pick up at least a little bit of the Vietnamese language before
Studied
you
for a year.
What was the reaction that you got from Vietnamese people when you used their language?
Oh, it was wonderful. Shock first, and the fact they felt very complimented by the fact that somebody took the time to learn their language. And of course, they would return the compliment by trying to say hello back to you in English. And one of the cute little things they came up with was, we would say, hello, how are you? And they would say, hello, how old are you? And so I got very proficient in telling them my age in Vietnamese.
Thank you.
We want to go into some depth about what you saw and the people and what they were doing, because our viewers really enjoyed that.
Sure.
You have the advantage of some comparisons working with the Vietnamese peoples you do at your place of employment. In my observation of people who have come from Vietnam, that they are very, very dedicated individuals.
Absolutely.
The younger ones do excellent school, and they're so driven to excel.
Very true.
Would you confirm that? And secondly, I know you were there a brief period of time, but did you see that same kind of activity and commitment in Vietnam?
The Oriental people in general are very industrious, and the Vietnamese people in particular, I think those who have come to America, because of what they've come from, they're so appreciative of a new lifestyle and to have jobs. Many of them do not speak English, and so getting jobs is not that easy for them. So I just really appreciate their dedication to the work, and we saw that same work ethic while we were there, whether it be out in the fields or their little storefronts or peddlers. They're learning some capitalism as well.
Because it was a war-torn country during the conflict, both in the North and the South. Tell us a little bit about at least the places where you visited. Are there still areas where the destruction is apparent, or they have rebuilt? I know, talking about this commitment and dedication, or were there sections where it was scarred and then you have the new development?
We didn't get to see any of that, and I think they are rebuilding. We did get to go to one place that had been used as a headquarters for intelligence at the time, and they basically have redone that, and it's beautiful. They have artwork, and it's just lovely there, and they hold a lot of their important parliamentary meetings now. So it was not damaged by the war.
Give us also a little bit of insight as you visited these three ports, and I know you went from the ports through the community in that area. What's daily life like? What did you see? Obviously, people are at work, other people doing things. Just for the viewer, give us kind of an oversketch of what you observed the people doing from day to day.
Well, one of the interesting experiences that we had was walking through one of their markets that the women go to every day, and part of why they go every day is they don't have refrigeration, and so all of the meats and vegetables and everything was just out in the open air, and so they're shopping and they're trading every day. That's just a way of life for them, and of course dedicated to that as well, out in the heat of the day.
Yes.
It's very, very hot and humid there, and so food can't last very long. So obviously they work very hard to trade and to keep things moving so that they don't lose their crops. And
so is there some division of labor that you indicated that most of the shoppers at the markets were women? Are men doing certain work that's very different from the women?
Not really that we could tell. A lot of men were at the market too.
Okay. And the children in school?
Some of the children in school, a lot of the children were in the market too. Working there.
Janelle Bird.
I want to follow up with what Tony was asking. What about transportation? What did you note about transportation, particularly in the city?
That basically transportation is by bicycle. So the traffic problem is not nearly as bad as it could be with the number of roads and the number of traffic signals that they have. which aren't very many.
But you didn't see a lot of cars, in other words,
Not
then.
that many, no.
They were not
It's
driving.
out of reach of most of the people. They're very, very poor.
What
Extremely
kinds of
poor.
houses did you see? Where would people likely have lived? What
Well,
kind
surprisingly,
of
the housing was a step above what you would think for a country that is so poor. They were adobe or brick or some kind of a, rather than a hut, sort of a dwelling, and had nice roofs on them. Of
And
course,
so
they don't
they-
have plumbing.
Most of them were living in single-family dwellings, as opposed to huge apartment complexes, which you can see in some places in Asia.
Right. Of course, in the city, there were the high-rise apartments, just like there are anyplace else. But once you get out into the country, there were single-family structures, but they would have grandparents and probably more than just the family itself living there.
So you were told that it probably was a multi-family, multi-generational kind of home.
Multi-generational, sure.
And what could you surmise as to entertainment? What kinds of entertainment might people have participated in? Could you tell that from your visit?
You couldn't really, though it seemed very social. The people were out and they were talking and of course looking at us as strangers, as visitors to their area. That was quite a source of entertainment for them.
What about religion? And did you see temples there? What is the basic religion in Vietnam?
Buddhism and Hinduism, they actually have a number of different religions. And like many of the Orientals have the style, I'm not sure what that's called, the pagoda type of style with the burning incense and that sort of thing.
Were you able to identify those as you traveled? Were you able to see, oh, here is a
Yes.
temple of some
Yes.
type?
They're
Were you
very
able to
typical.
visit one?
Yes, yes we were.
And
That
what was that like?
Smelly because of the incense was quite heavy. It was dark and very cluttered with icons and things like that, which again is quite typical of the Oriental religions.
Did you find lots of artwork or music that was around you?
No, we didn't. And that was probably lack of opportunity rather than lack of them having that sort of thing.
Perhaps you were not there long enough, is what you're saying,
Yes.
to really get acquainted with the music or
Yes.
To hear that.
Right.
Did you listen to radio, television? Is
No,
there
really
such a
no
thing?
opportunity. Again, just being on a bus and having one day to see the whole area, you're basically spending your time sightseeing. So you don't really have any opportunity to live there, to stay overnight, to stay in a hotel where you would have some of those opportunities.
Carrie, I want to ask some questions from a sort of a fellow tourist's perspective,
Okay.
somebody in the audience who might be contemplating a trip like that. First of all, was it at all difficult to arrange the trip, or was it comparable to any place else you visited?
It was easy to arrange this trip because it was through the cruise line. I actually wouldn't recommend doing it on your own if you don't have to, because it would be very much more difficult. The facilities are not really geared toward tourism yet. They're making many strides, building hotels. You can see a lot of construction going on, but they are not really prepared for an influx of people. So if you can do it through a group or a cruise line, as we did, for the next couple of years, that would be the best way.
Tell
to
us a little bit about your travel arrangements, and I think you said you started the tour in Singapore. Is that correct?
Yes.
Long plane flight to get to.
Oh, yes.
You have to be prepared for that. In other words.
Yes.
In the 18-20-hour range, or how?
I slept most of
Did-
the
well,
way,
good for
so
you.
I don't remember a lot of it. But yeah, you're going to leave out of either San Francisco or Los Angeles, and it's a good 16 hours to Tokyo, and then another 5 or 6 hours to Singapore after that.
So anyone who's traveled to the Far East, to Singapore or to Hong Kong or to Tokyo, understands what that's going to be about.
You bet.
Visa, a passport, those sorts of things required.
Yes, they are. Visa.
How about any medical preparations? Did you have to?
No, we didn't
No
have any
shots
medical
or-
preparations, no.
It's going to please a lot of people.
It is, yeah, because one of the threats there is malaria, certainly in a tropical area, but we were not required to have any shots.
And the currency in Vietnam is Did you exchange any currency or buy?
No, we didn't. They accept American dollars.
Oh, they do?
Everyone loves American dollars.
Any warnings at all? The cruise people are usually pretty good about taking care of their guests.
Yes.
And I've even been in some situations where either travel agents or materials that you read say, well, you need to be a little careful about. Anything like that you had to deal with while you were in Vietnam, or is it a pretty safe place?
From the time that we were there, we were on a tour. And so that was very safe. Again, doing it on your own, there may be some other issues that you could run into. Certainly drinking the water would be a warning, and being careful about the food that you eat.
Well, now you've just hit on one of my next topics. I mean, near and dear to any traveler's heart, I think, are food and shopping. Let's talk a little bit about food. And I know that as a cruise ship guest, most of your need for food was taken care of in lavish style. But did you have an opportunity to eat?
Yes, just one meal, and we were taken to a fabulous hotel and given a spread, just a feast. And that is not how the normal people eat. I happen to know how the normal people eat from the people who work at Phoenix Transformer, and it's basically a rice diet, and sometimes a little fish, sometimes a little chicken, but basically white rice, vegetables.
Shopping. Any shopping opportunities there at all?
Not really,
No.
but they do have a lovely product that the Vietnamese, many Vietnamese people know how to do, and it's a lacquer. Kind of a bamboo lacquered boxes, vases, wall hangings, a number of different things, and they're just beautiful. Very, very Vietnamese looking.
Well, and you got an opportunity, I guess, to compare shopping in Vietnam to Singapore and
Hong Kong.
Thailand and
Yeah.
Hong Kong.
No comparison.
No comparison.
It's a third world country, and Singapore, of course, and Bangkok, they've made their worldwide reputations from being a place to shop. So it's quite different.
Did you get a sense that along with tourist accommodations, new hotels, is something that either the government or the people are moving to respond to?
Yes, definitely. You definitely see the creeping in of capitalism. And the more tourists come, the more they will fill the need for that.
As a tourist, is there a favorite spot that you saw that you really liked and would recommend other people to visit?
Not particularly in Vietnam, though I would like to go back in a few years because the amount of economic development that we could just see going on, it's going to change their face significantly. And over the next couple of years, it would be interesting to see how that changes and how they're coming along. So I'd love to go back.
Well, and that leads me to the question that I always want to ask anytime we do a sort of a travel show. You would go back, so I take it you would recommend the trip to other people?
Yes, I certainly would.
Excellent, thanks.
I want to take advantage of your, again, opportunity to know Vietnamese in this country and talk to them before you went, after you got back, and then the exposure, the limited exposure you had to the Vietnamese people living there. Those individuals who now live in this country, and now that the war's been over for some time, and although it is under the communist regime, do you find with the American Vietnamese that they're inquiring with you about how things are changing, or do they have a desire to visit or to go back?
Many of them do return every few years. Many of them left family. Some of them left spouses and children to come over. So yes, they were very concerned about what was going on. And of course, my impressions, they wanted me to love it. And so many of them came up and wanted, what's it like? What's going on? And they still very much are proud of their country, and it's part of them.
And if they do return, even for visits, I suppose after some of the agreements have been made, that they're not endangered by going back because of the reasons they might have left?
Yeah, none of those who I know. There may be others that do have a problem, depending on what their government situation was when they left. Many of our people are young, and they were children at the time, and grew up and said, I'm looking for a better opportunity, and over they came.
It'd be more risky for someone who'd been politically active and
That's right.
opposed to the regime.
That's right.
Did you have any opportunity in talking to the Vietnamese people about if there is any feelings or attitudes about the South Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese, although they are now integrated? Did you indicate anything?
Didn't really have an opportunity to explore that. And with limited communication, awfully hard to get into political discussion.
In spite of that, I'll ask one other question in that area.
Okay.
There has been a very long history of conflict between China and Vietnam and some other countries in Asia. Either here with your friends in the United States or Vietnamese are there, have you found any indication of how they are feeling about what's happening in China?
Well, actually, I haven't seen any tension between the Vietnamese people and the Chinese, and we have both working in Phoenix. There has been more with Cambodian or people from Laos. We had one at one time, and that did not work. So from that respect, I saw some tension, but they get along great with the Chinese people. And maybe that's because they're now in America and they've lost some of that. We didn't have an opportunity there to explore that at all. China is actually doing quite a bit of economic development and investment in Vietnam. And of course, the more money that comes into the country, the better they are. So they want that. They seek that out.
There's competition for trade around the world. What evidence did you see of United States trade in Vietnam?
Pepsi. I don't think we saw McDonald's there, but it won't be long. A number of companies with names that you would recognize. I don't recall right now, but several times. Oh, there's one. There's one. So
but certainly there's evidences
you
taking
bet.
place. Janelle Burke.
Yes.
You indicated earlier in the show that you'd spent some time preparing to go to Vietnam by learning the Vietnamese language. What other languages did you find spoken there?
Well, I wanted to practice my Vietnamese, so that's what I focused on, but certainly French is a secondary language. And a few people spoke enough English to get by.
So that was helpful.
Yes, it was.
And another question that I have is with regard to comparisons. You've traveled in many countries. With regards to other countries, what are the comparisons that you would make in terms of travel for those of our viewers who might be considering a trip to one place or another? What kinds of comparisons would you make?
Well, I would say as a comparison, not to go there unless you really want to see the people and see the sights. It is not a fun place. If you want a fun place, go to London or go to Australia. It is a place where it's rather sobering because of the poverty there. And there's not a lot to do. You're basically there to learn about the culture and learn about the people. And so you need to take that in mind if you want to visit there.
Now, my next series of questions has to do with maybe if you can think of in your mind a couple of vignettes of things that you will carry with you in your heart forever, the kinds of things that happened on this trip that were very special, maybe a face of someone or a special person that you met.
Yes.
And can you do that, perhaps 3 of those, and one of those including a visit to some kind of a building as well?
Okay, well, one of the people I met in the market stands out in my mind, this little old man who wanted to practice his English with me. And he couldn't speak very well, and we just had a terrible time communicating. And finally, we would start writing things down, and we were writing to each other. He'd write an English word, and I'd write the Vietnamese word. And that was just a very fun, special time.
And he was older then,
yes.
so he was very interested in learning.
Yes.
He was still interested in learning.
And another, not a particular person that I can pick out, but the young girls were so interested to know if I was married. And so they would find a way to ask if I was married, and then when they would find out that I wasn't, that caused them much giggling behind their hands. Like this. They tittered about that quite a bit.
Do they wear makeup? Are they fashion conscious?
They are fashion conscious in their own way. We saw some beautiful Vietnamese outfits. The typical tunic for the women with long sleeves, very, very fitted, slit on the sides with the loose-fitting pant underneath. And the hats, of course, many, many people wore the straw hats. So in their own way, yes, they're fashion conscious, but not Western clothing.
And I suppose that many of them had very slim bodies,
Very tiny people.
based on the fact that their diets would help them to
Yes.
make sure that they
Yes.
didn't gain weight.
Yes. And that was another special thing. You asked for 3. Here's my third one. That they didn't understand why I was so tall. And of course to them, when everyone is very tiny and very small boned, that I seemed like a giant to them. So that was kind of funny just to hear their comments.
But certainly not to us.
No.
And then you visited the Unification Palace, I
Yes.
take it. And can you describe for our viewers somewhat what it would be like?
Well, I had mentioned that earlier. It is now used for parliament-type procedures. The vice president gives talks and holds receptions and things there. It would not be anywhere near the scale of our parliament buildings, but for the buildings there, it was quite upscale. Beautiful grounds, well kept, very old, maybe 1930s, 1940s. So it looked old and it hadn't really been kept up.
And some European look to it, is that correct?
Somewhat. No garish style, no French influence at all. Very, very stark, and not a lot of plants or anything to make it warm and inviting.
Steve Sheen.
Carrie, we don't have much time left, but I've got a few questions that are just kind of all over the board. One that occurred to me, and I have another friend in the area who has been to Vietnam recently too, and I think he also went on a tour. He didn't just travel alone, but it wasn't a cruise. Did you and your mother consider anything other than the cruise? Did you look at other travel opportunities?
We had, and they were out of our price range. And that was one of the reasons we chose the cruise. Was it was a very good value for the money.
I see. We talked a little bit before the show about population problems in Vietnam. Was that in evidence there, and do you know what they're trying to do about it?
In comparison to Thailand, which we also visited, the population explosion was just horrendous. It didn't seem that bad. They are going to be facing the same issue that China has faced, and they're going to have to put in some kind of restrictions here soon. But as far as I know, they haven't yet.
And you, we're almost out of time, but real quickly, you said that it is a poor country, and that's apparent. You've been to 55 other countries. Does it, compared to other third world countries, seem even more poor?
It seems more poor than a lot of places, yes.
On that note, we have to bring the program to conclusion. Carrie Damiano, we thank you so much on behalf of the panel and the staff. You've been a delight to have on the program, and it's been most informative. And again, we thank you on this trip from Phoenix here that you took time out to be with us. We appreciate it.
Very welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite you to be with us again next week when we will discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.